It is important for us to let you know the unfortunate situation that Mexico has experienced for many years. Mexico is a very rich country talking about biodiversity and natural resources. However, most of the Mexican population is in a state of economic and personal poverty due to the inequality that exists in the country. There are more than 170 countries in the world, but only 12 of them are considered megadiverse, and together they house between 60 and 70% of the planet's total biodiversity. Mexico is one of these megadiverse countries because it has 12% of the terrestrial diversity of the planet. This is thanks to the topography, the variety of climates, and to the complex geological, biological, and cultural history of our territory. Mexico also tops the charts for species richnesses. It ranks first in the world in reptile wealth, second in mammals, and fourth in amphibians and plants. Furthermore, one of the main economic activities in our country is mining, thanks to the large mineral deposits. However, despite the fact that it is a very rich industry, the presence of qualified personnel is necessary. Unfortunately, the Mexican educational system can be defined as insufficient and questionable. The conditions that the educational system offers for teaching and learning are markedly unequal. People who are in better social and economic conditions tend to have better school careers, better learning results, and also tend to have better school services. On the other hand, those who live in a rural area experience failure at dropping out of school more frequently. They also tend to have lower school learning and receive lower quality educational services. Few professionals stay in Mexico, since most people with advanced studies decide to seek better opportunities abroad. The so-called brain drain is a highly recurrent situation that generates a significant loss of human and economic capital. According to the United Nations in Mexico, the income obtained by a woman was barely 46% of the perceived by a man by doing the same activities. The INEGI numbers show that female inequality in the economic sphere and the impact of a masculinized culture continue being a big problem. Most of the wage inequality of urban workers in Mexico can be explained by the evolution of the minimum wage. An average Mexican who works a full formal day receives the minimum wage. This only keeps him poor. All these factors of inequality affect the country in poverty, hunger, and in the security of each Mexican citizen. Despite the fact that the levels of people in extreme poverty have decreased during the last decade, this continues being a big problem that directly affects our country. The main factors that influence the existence of this phenomenon are the lack of employment, corruption, and the presence of poorly paid jobs. Unfortunately, poverty generates more problems in other sectors, such as health problems, malnutrition, crime, addictions, family abandonment, teenage pregnancies, and even divorcing couples. One of the most affected sectors is the health sector. If the evolution of the Mexican health system is taken into account, we can observe the lack of interest on the part of the government for the creation of and updating of medical material, such as the implementation of hospitals, clinics, and devices to perform complex interventions, which with the current tools are impossible. In addition to the lack of hospital equipment that exists in Mexico, it is also an enormous lack of health personnel such as doctors, nurses, orderlies, and nutritionists. All this occurs because the medical career can be too expensive, from buying books to buying surgical uniforms. Another factor that influences the absence of doctors is that all those who work in public hospitals are not very well paid. Another important consequence by poverty is the lack of medicines throughout the country. As has already been mentioned before on several occasions, there is a huge lack of infrastructure in Mexico. This also occurs for the production and distribution of medicine through pharmacology laboratories. The creation of medicines is reduced, and as a consequence, the cost of this increases drastically. Unfortunately, health services in Mexico are very expensive, so that people with limited economic resources do not even have access to quality healthcare. The perspective on poverty has different meanings, causes, and consequences around the world. On one hand, there are people who believe that poverty is generated due to the bad decisions taken by the members of the government of each country. These people establish that the job of politicians is to distribute the country's wealth equitably. And they affirm that the poverty is present because they do not responsibly invest material and economic resources in the territory's infrastructure for the exploitation of natural resources. The best example is the way our country is forced to buy fuels on a large scale from other countries due to the lack of refineries, and even when this is a country with large oil deposits. On the other hand, there are people who argue that poverty takes place due to the lack of individual responsibility of each of the citizens. These people affirm that the economic problems of each family are produced by the absence of interest and improvement of each person. They state that people with low resources are all of those people who decided not to work or study. Therefore, those people do not have an economic stability. This situation occurs in most cases. So, if a person is born in conditions of poverty, there are high probabilities that that person will remain in that condition for the rest of their life due to the lack of opportunities. A frequent hypothesis is that inequality, margination, and poverty could play an important role in increasing violence. People with less academic and economic stability have a greater possibility of committing an act of crime than a person with a job, an advanced student, and of course, with a general stability. Because the minimum wage is not enough to cover basic needs of a person, this leads individuals to commit diverse criminal acts. In Mexico, one of the most common crimes is theft or assault of property or money. Desperation, stress, and anguish are factors that cause people to seek in a way to satisfy their needs, regardless the consequences. As a result, the easiest way to do it is through theft. Despite the fact that armed robberies are crimes that are most committed annually in Mexico, they are not the ones that generate the greatest impact at the national level. The organized crime, such as drug trafficking, armed sales, and prostitution, among others, are those that have the most impact in our country. Drug cartels often use these vulnerable people to produce drugs in different clandestine locations throughout the Mexican Republic. They also use them to sell it in so-called points of sale, where late at night they establish themselves at key points to wait for the customers and make the sale. It is true that the earnings from this type of actions are very lucrative, but they are undoubtedly highly illegal and dangerous. Mexico is a country with the capacity and sufficient resources to be a developed country. However, the country is bogged down by various factors such as corruption, ignorance, lack of interest in helping others, and of course, the lack of transparency, commitment, and interest, not only of people with the ability to change our reality, but also due to the lack of improvement of the part of the citizens. Mexico has stayed in the past in the government and politics aspect. The fundamental problem, then, is whether the current state is able to design and implement social policy based on rights allow aimed at achieving more equitable society.